Welcome to Henry George Daily Devotional, episode 78. I'm sorry for the 4 days. I missed 3 days last week, I guess. Let's see, I went 78, 79. Yeah, 3 days. No excuses. But we are back with chapter 4 of book 7. This is property in land, historically considered in the book 7, The Justice of the Remedy. We just talked a bunch about Rome and then the feudalism. Let's see what George has for us next. He writes, the general course of the development of modern civilization since the feudal period has been to the subversion of these natural and primary ideas of collective ownership in the soil. Paradoxical as it may appear, the emergence of liberty from feudal bonds has been accompanied by a tendency in the treatment of land to the form of ownership which involves the enslavement of the working classes and which is now beginning to be strongly felt all over the civilized world in the pressure of an iron yoke which cannot be relieved by any extension of mere political power or personal liberty, and which political economists mistake for the pressure of natural laws and for the oppressions of capital. That's a big sentence. So it's saying it is paradoxical that the emergence of liberty from feudalism is still leading to a form of land ownership that basically reestablishes a form of severe oppression of capital, um, an iron yoke. It can't be relieved by mere political power or personal liberty. Yes, we have all these personal liberties to have sexual relations with whomever we want, go to church or not go to church, wherever, whenever we want, wear whatever clothings we want, ingest all different kinds of substances and liquids that we want. But this cannot relieve, or, this does not relieve the iron yoke of the form of land ownership, an enslavement of the working classes. And I would say the middle classes, while they do not face this exact form of enslavement, they are having to deal with the isolation and somewhat of the stagnation, I suppose, of the middle class life and the suburban life, which they have all come to find the good in it at times. And I do agree it's better than being in slum houses. But I was just reading another article about loneliness in the suburbs today, and how significant loneliness is in terms of our well-being. And that's the price that the middle class pays with suburban development, in my opinion. A price. I think a lot of the middle class is like, George describes this wedge. There's the people who are the landowners and the people who are the renters. He needs a new term for the people who are landowners but mortgage payers that are this, like, middle middle class between the landed folk and the working class. That there's some weirder dynamics with those people, and that's my where I live, I guess, or the family I've grown up in. Paying off that mortgage, man. This is clear that in Great Britain today, the right of the people as a whole to the soil of their native country is much less fully acknowledged than it was in feudal times. A much smaller proportion of the people own the soil, and their ownership is more absolute. The commons, once so extensive and so largely contributing to the independence and support of the lower classes, have all but a small remnant of yet worthless land been appropriated to individual ownership and enclosed. Okay. They we didn't have feudalism here in the USA, but I believe you that the commons in it is definitely true here that there are not many commons. Hardly like I mean there's like these little pockets of city parks, I suppose. But you can't work them. You can't yeah. You can't go farm them definitely. You can't let your cattle go graze at the park down the street. But you can take your kids there. You can go play. Well, sometimes you can play sports there if you get a permit. I was reading that the reason China is so bad at soccer because they're not allowed to just gather casually at in places to play sports. You have to have a permit, and that's like strictly enforced there. I mean that is technically true here in the U.S. a lot too, um, which is ridiculous. Okay. They've been enclosed. The great estates of the church, which were essentially common property devoted to a public purpose, have been diverted from that trust to enrich individuals. The dues of the military tenants have been shaken off, and the cost of maintaining the military establishment and paying the interest upon an immense debt accumulated by wars has been saddled upon the whole people. Sound familiar? Wars and debt. And yeah, of course, now we our industrial military complex. And the way we are saddled with these debts is in taxes upon the necessaries and comforts of life. Yes. Uh, sin taxes. Anyway, sales tax, whatever. The crown lands have mostly passed into private possession, and for the support of the royal family and all the petty princelings who marry into it, the British workman must pay in the price of his mug of beer and pipe of tobacco. The English yeoman, the sturdy breed who won Crecy and Poitiers and Agincourt, is as extinct as the mastodon. The English yeoman was just like he worked for his feudal lord, right? Oh no, he's a small landed between sergeant and a groom or a squire and a page, cultivating a small landed estate, a freeholder. Yeoman. Yo man. The Scottish clansman whose right to the soil of his native hills was then as undisputed as that of his chieftain has been driven out to make room for the sheep ranges or deer parks of that chieftain's descendant. I was speaking to a buddy of mine who married a girl from Wyoming and lives in Wyoming. He's a geologist. And he was saying you'd think land would be cheap there, but it might be a little bit cheaper than Los Angeles, but there's all these giant Wyoming ranchers. Then it's like pretty sparsely populated, but there's all these ranches. Then there's all this land owned by the Union Pacific Railroads that they just got from when they built the railroads a million years ago. And then there's Jackson Hole, which is like a huge like resort town. And so land is not actually that cheap. Just sharing a somewhat related idea, things I've learned. The tribal right of the Irishman has been turned into a tenancy at will. 30,000 men have legal power to expel the whole population from 5/6 of the British Islands. and the vast majority of the British people have no right whatever to their native land, save to walk the streets or trudge the roads. Sorry if you hear the vacuuming going on. Too bad, so sad. Uh, to them, I think the 30,000 men who could expel 5/6 of the British islands and the vast majority of the people, or to them may be fittingly applied the words of a tribune of the Roman people. Men of Rome, said Tiberius Gracchus, men of Rome, you are called the lords of the world, yet have no right to a square foot of its soil. The wild beasts have their dens, but the soldiers of Italy have only water and air. This was what a tribune said to the Roman people. The result has perhaps been more marked in England than anywhere else, but the tendency is observable everywhere, having gone further in England owing to circumstances which have developed it with greater rapidity. The reason, I take it, that with the extension of the idea of personal freedom has gone on an extension of the idea of private property in land, is that as in the progress of civilization, the grosser forms of supremacy connected with land ownership were dropped or abolished or became less obvious, attention was diverted from the more insidious but really more potential forms, and the landowners were easily enabled to put property and land on the same basis as other property. All right, this was a quick little paragraph, but I think seems very relevant and important to me, that it was this idea of personal freedom, which was so strongly felt by all of the humans everywhere in revolting against, divine right and kings and tyranny and all this, centralized power. And then it was able to be warped by those powerful people to be like, all right, everyone deserves personal freedom. Yeah, personal freedom. Owning land is part of that. Duh, is what they claim. And so we cling to this idea of personal freedom, and we associate that with having land, because in some sense, that personal freedom is the idea of having your fair share of the earth. That is exactly the Georgist argument. That is, what seems true and just to me. It is getting your, human earthling inheritance of sharing the earth. But we attach it to this idea of private property that can be traded and increased and sold off. Lots of people argue you can, that it's a denial of your personal freedom if you can't sell your land or, and make money off of it, just as it is to own it. And then this other little bit here, the grosser forms of supremacy. Just funny, I didn't know. I wonder when gross, like I know our modern usage of the word gross, something like grotesque or something. I guess I always felt like that was a more modern use, but maybe it was true then too. 1879. Yeah, we don't. The wealthy have like started to you know, they're more subtle about it. They don't go around rubbing it in our faces. You know who does rub it in our faces are like the ones who newly earn their wealth because they have earned it and they're proud of it, right? Like you have all of the athletes, you have all of the celebrities who became movie stars, you have like the tech billionaires, and presumably, I would say mostly those people have earned a lot of their wealth. I would still argue that um, a lot of these industries are perverted in that it's a very winner takes all, and that's due to a lot of regulation or monopolistic capture enabled by governments. I think that's even true in a lot of the sports world, especially, although I think that less applies to the athletes themselves. I think that heavily applies to the team owners, that they get these artificial benefits from the city and the state. They get all these sort of subsidies for building all of their stadiums, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And then I definitely think that a lot of the tech companies get weird artificial but not monopolies granted them through patenting, and you also have a bunch of these tech companies that have like a whole bunch of defense contracts too. Well, not a bunch, but some. Um, and, if you want to get really tenuous with the connections, you could say Georgism, or not Georgism, but land monopoly created the slums, and then we enriched all of our the car industry as this weird sort of suburban fake escape from land monopoly. We subsidized all of the car industries with all of this road infrastructure and all of the car-centric funding, which created this really, separated, isolated community. And so to patch that, we needed something like social media, so that that could prey upon our loneliness and insecurity. All of the problems of the world come from land monopoly. Duh. Okay, maybe not all of them, but alright, anyway, enough. We go back to George. The growth of national power, either in the form of royalty or parliamentary government, stripped the great lords of individual power and importance, and of their jurisdiction and power over persons, and so repressed striking abuses, as the growth of Roman imperialism repressed the more striking cruelties of slavery. And we shouldn't diminish the absolute horrors of like physical slavery and all of the horrific abuses we hear of, like, I don't know, dungeons in medieval times. Well, that's all actually post-Roman, but getting rid of those was great. That was progress. We just failed to deal with some of these more, I don't know, harder to see links. The disintegration of the large feudal estates, which, until the tendency to concentration, arising from the modern tendency to production upon a large scale, is strongly felt, operated to increase the number of landowners, and the abolition of the restraints by which landowners, when population was sparser, endeavored to compel laborers to remain on their estates, also contributed to draw away attention from the essential injustice involved in private property in land. While the steady progress of legal ideas drawn from the Roman law, which has been the great mine and storehouse of modern jurisprudence, tended to level the natural distinction between property in land and property in other things. Thus, with the extension of personal liberty, went on an extension of individual proprietorship in land. Yeah, that was the big slip up. We extended an individual proprietorship in land and did not foresee the consequence of that. The political power of the barons was, moreover, not broken by the revolt of the classes who could clearly feel the injustice of land ownership. Such revolts took place again and again, but again and again were they repressed with terrific cruelties. What broke the power of the barons was the growth of the artisan and trading classes, between whose wages and rent there is not the same obvious relation. These classes too developed under a system of close guilds and corporations, which, as I have previously explained in treating of trade combinations and monopolies, enabled them somewhat to fence themselves in from the operation of the general law of wages, and which were much more easily maintained than now. All right, yes, he did when we read the section about unions, combinations in trade, and how that is can be a localized power against the monopolies, but it ultimately will not provide a society-wide form of justice. When the effect of improved methods of transportation and the effect of rudimentary education and of current news is steadily making population more mobile. These classes did not see and do not yet see that the tenure of land is the fundamental fact which must ultimately determine the conditions of industrial, social, and political life. Yeah, we didn't get it. I mean, we understood that slavery and denial of like a right to your own body was unjust and wrong, and so humanity made some progress there, but there's still more progress to be made. And so the tendency has been to assimilate the idea of property in land with that of property in things of human production. And even step backwards have been taken and been hailed as steps in advance. The French, we're going further now. The French Constituent Assembly in 1789 thought it was sweeping away a relic of tyranny when it abolished tithes and imposed the support of the clergy on general taxation. The Abbé Sieyès stood alone when he told them that they were simply remitting to the proprietors a tax which was one of the conditions on which they held their lands and reimposing it on the labor of the nation. All right, I don't know much about this whole deal. It's hard for me to I don't. So tithes. Uh, I, that was, from what I know, is paying a portion of your income at church, and now they're imposing it through a general taxation. That does seem to just invite government corruption, I guess, but I don't know much about this particular situation. And then it sounds like George is saying this guy's the only one who saw what was up, that they were remitting, cancel or refrain from extracting or inflicting, or send money in the payment or as a gift. We were like gifting to the proprietors a tax, which was one of the conditions on which they held their lands, or it was not. Wait, what? Remitting had both that cancel or refrain. Yeah, that's how I read the sentence initially. When you remit a tax, when a company remits sales tax to the government, it simply means they are sending the cash to the government. It's sending it to them to make a decision. Wow, this yeah, this is yeah. Remitted is this payment, or it is to cancel or refrain from exact. Those are like almost opposite meanings. um, so we're remitting to the proprietors a tax, which is one of the conditions on which they, I guess, the people held their lands. Um, and reimposing it on the labor of the nation. So who's the they? But in vain. Yeah. The Abbesias, being a priest, was looked on as defending the interests of his order, when in truth he was defending the rights of man. In those tithes, the French people might have retained a large public revenue, which would not have taken one centime from the wages of labor or the earnings of capital. French tithes. I mean, so okay, there was the French Revolution. And they were remitting to the proprietors a tax and reimposing it on the labor of the nation, but in vain. If he was looked on as defending the interests of his order, he's like, oh yeah, we should keep the tithe. Um, They, the people, were simply not paying to the proprietors who are the proprietors? The the government? A tax, which was one of the conditions on which the people held the people's land, their lands. But then if they were paying, if this does mean they were paying it, and then they are reimposing it on the labor of them, I don't know. I get that, like, I don't know. This is making me mad. I'm, I'm, I'm gonna end in anger today, in frustration. All right. See you next time. Bye bye.